Okay, I appear to be live. Now, I just have to get Eva to join me. Okay, well, that's easy. I don't know if anyone remembers me having terrible trouble with how to invite someone by using the new thing, the webcam thing YouTube wants us to use. But it's dead bloody easy on Hangouts, I'll tell you that much. So let me see, just going to move that across there, have my chat there. See if Eva comes in. I sent her the link and it should work. So we will soon see if that works, and then we can get going, because this is all for, to have some podcast material as well, besides, providing some entertainments for folks watching on YouTube as well. Just okay, I just saw something really weird and it distracted me and I had to look into it. God, I did little clippers on the sort of stubble today, and I think I've got all little bits of hair inside my shirt now, which I tried to avoid, and it's all itchy. So I hope I won't itch and scratch too much. Hey, musical aviator, how are you going? Just trying to get Eva on here as well.
Hello, are you live? Because it's got that stupid other camera on. It's down here. It's really annoying.
Oh, right. So you got your new one happening.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure it out. Hang on, and you're so loud. This is all my new computer. Hi, everybody. I didn't realize we are going to be like live when I clicked the button. We'll figure out stuff.
Sorry, it is.
I'm making you louder. Hang on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to actually start this without someone. Sorry, I don't know how to get someone else on without starting it. I should look into that.
Yeah, no, we did it before.
Yeah, well, we talked after before. No. The last time I did it live.
No, the first time we did it.
Did we?
Yeah, because remember we were checking to see if that live button was up. Oh, it's all like, it's such a horrible angle. I have to kind of get right down.
Are you on a laptop or a desktop?
Laptop.
You need to, like, put it on books or something.
Well, yeah, no, because then it's, I suppose, I don't know. It's really annoying. Hang on. Hi. Keep talking, and I'll try and work this out. Well, surely there's a way that I can change camera.
Yeah, probably. I'm not sure. Do you see the Hangouts thing?
Hang on, just have to put that off.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you see the Hangouts thing. There's a when you mouse over it, there's a bunch of little controls, and one's like a gear. That's the settings, and you can choose what camera.
I don't have that. Screen share and showcase on the left.
Right.
Where would the settings thing be? Oh, right there. Right, I see what you're saying. Hang on. All right, cool.
Now this might make you disappear for a moment while you reset, but that's okay. Oh yeah, see, look at that.
There I am. Well, now it's all right. Hang on, let's see. All right. Oh, now it's all at the wrong angle because I've been playing with it, the other stupid one. That's all right. Hi.
Okay, we ready to go? So we've got a few people, and yes, for people in the chat, this is not my normal live streams where I'm going to be interacting with the chat, although I will be keeping an eye on it in case anyone asks a particularly good question or has a particularly good insight or needs their ass kicked out of the chat because they're an idiot. But Eva and I are going to be talking, and besides hopefully entertaining you all, I'm going to use it, putting some podcasts in the bank, as it were, so I can actually start posting them to Podcast World regularly and not freak out if we miss one week because we got some spares.
Yes. It's weird now with this new camera. I'm getting an echo. We should have tested this all out before we went live, honestly. It's all part of the fun. Hang on. Are you getting a weird echo or is it just me?
It's just you, actually.
Okay, all right, then. It's only happening every so often. So
okay. So, all right. Well, I think oh my God. And the fridge started making noise just as I was going to talk. There's nothing. Do I normally have to? I'm just getting asked by someone who I think wants to get kicked out. Do I normally kick many people from the chat? Only boring morons, actually. If someone's being boring and
I don't get to see any of the stuff that comes up.
Do you want to see the stuff?
No, maybe. Why? Do they say nice things?
Usually, yes. Because if you have another window where you can see it on YouTube.
Oh, but then will it be another delay and will it be weird or?
You would have, yeah, it is like a 10-second delay.
Or you've gone.
You would have to have the sound off on YouTube. And yeah, this is the thing you get used to. The chat's about 10 seconds behind. Like if I said to someone, type hello now, it'll start appearing 10 seconds after I say that. So that's the delay from
I'll leave it for now because I think,
it'll confuse you.
Everything I've just sorted out with the camera, that's my technology for today. And I'm
maxed out on technology.
I'm so bad at technology.
Okay.
Those people who do know me, will know that things break, things freeze. Well, Sunday, was it Sunday we were going to do?
It was Sunday we tried to do it, yeah.
I plugged in, I did everything, and I looked, and then I went and I came back down, and my Wi-Fi had gone, and it went for like 2 days. So, hi, I'm back.
Well, yes, you are back now. And yeah, again, just to fill the people in who are watching, because again, it's not exactly how I'd normally do live stream. Eva and I are going to talk for about an hour, and I will at a later time use the audio for a podcast. Now, I'm pretty sure you agreed to the topic the other day when we were doing Messenger chat. And it was basically it came to mind as a topic because it's a perennial topic, but also the drama in the US with the guy called Jeffrey Epstein, who's a close friend of Trump's, who's he got off from bloody sexually abusing children.
Education pause. Even telling this story, he got off.
Yeah, well, no, he did repeatedly, apparently. Yeah, he got off with a slap on the wrist for really serious child sex abuse charges. And the person who got him the sweetheart deal is now working for Trump. And it's all like dodgy AF. And, but, so we're going to, the topic of conversation, the difference, and this will just be a starting point, I'm sure we'll go all over the place, but the difference between sex trafficking and sex work, because particularly in America, where sex work is illegal. Well, this is the thing. When you're not uptight, when it's not illegal, there's a pretty broad definition of what sex work is. It's, in yon olden times, what we call prostitution or escort work. That's illegal except for very specific instances in the US.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's pretty much illegal across the board. The one place in America where sex work is legal, like full service sex work, is in Nevada, and really only in a very small part of Nevada.
Yes. So it's the only
ranch and that sort of stuff is.
The only legal brothels in America are in Nevada. But again, most people, sex work encompasses also porn,
Yeah.
and stripping, and in this modern world of ours, cam girl stuff as well. So it gets a bit confusing because in America, it's the full service sex work is almost completely illegal, but it's still just as common as anywhere in the world because we're all hypocrites. Yeah.
All people want and like and enjoy sex in all nations, in all cultures, in all everything, you know, and it's the sad thing is the shame and the bullshit put on it that creates these laws that create all the bullshit. It's like a circle, it just goes around.
So, okay, so that is what we're going to talk about. Well, we've obviously started talking. This is our warm up. I'm going to pause for a second and then start with a podcast intro, and we're going to hit the ground running. How's that sound?
All right. If you haven't already hit the ground running with the ground with my legs going far too fast, you know, when you run down a hill and you can't up with your legs. Yeah, that's right.
Wile E. Coyote style. Like, okay. Well, welcome everyone who's listening along in podcast world. I am here with the fabulous Eva. Hello to you.
Hello.
We're using the magic of technology to talk between states, and the magic of technology is somewhat limited in Australia, so apologies if we get stutters.
Yes, yeah, I think that's something that we should have as a disclaimer on every episode is that we are in Australia, our internet is shit, sorry.
Yes, we get worse compared to the world every year. I think we're 70-something in the world at the moment.
Fun.
Yeah, and it just keeps getting worse. But anyway, yeah, we are going to talk today about a subject that Eva's written about. I feel I can call you an expert on this. You've written for many publications on this.
I suppose I hate the term expert. I don't hate it. In general, I hate it for myself because I suffer from crippling imposter syndrome for a lot of my life. So but yeah, I know a lot about it. It's a passion. It's something that's really means and I feel strongly about. So yeah, in that sense, I know my own feelings about it, my own stuff about it. But I deign to speak for anybody else's experiences either.
Yeah, speaking of disclaimers, while we are going to be having a conversation here and putting forward opinions, this is one of, I mean, most areas are like this, but this very much so. When we say stuff, there is going to be an asterisk with your mileage may vary.
Yes, yeah, and especially when speaking of the experiences of people especially in minorities that are often, you know, denigrated, whether it's people of color, whether it's sex workers, whether it's people with disabilities, you know, the experiences are so broad and people within those sort of minorities and within those groups and communities often get really frustrated because there are only a few voices that speak and they often seem to speak for everybody. And so I try and make it very clear in a lot of the spaces that I speak about this sort of stuff is that I speak from my own experiences and my own I guess my own feelings from things, and they're very different. I do come from quite a privileged place as well, and I think that needs recognition, especially in talking about sex work where there are so many people that don't have the privileges that I have and have had in the industry. So yeah, there's my disclaimer. This is all my stuff.
So yeah, I don't think I've actually explicitly said the topic is sex work versus sex trafficking. And I wanted to talk about this because there's a big story in the US with a scumbag by the name of Jeffrey Epstein, who's a close friend of Trump's, has been known. This is one of these gross, open secret things. Everybody has known about this for decades, decade or more at least, that this guy was procuring underage girls on false pretenses and forcing them to have sex. You get horrible people defending it, but legally, there's no consent with someone who's underage. They were, and by all accounts, they were tricked. They were tricked and coerced, and he didn't do it once or twice. It's a pattern that, according to some stories, went on for many, many years. And he was let off with like a slap on the wrist on one charge. And it turns out the prosecutor who brought down the severity of the charge against him now works for Trump, and Trump's got to be sweating a bit because Trump's been associated with this guy for a long time.
Yeah.
But the reason I wanted to have this conversation is to avoid people saying you're a hypocrite, because, you know, I try to be supportive of people with different lives to me, try to be sex positive. Interviewed a few different people on my YouTube channel over the years who've been involved in different facets of sex work, and I'm very supportive. But this guy is an exploiter. He is a trafficker. For you, Eva, what's a simple definition of the difference between sex work and sex trafficking?
I suppose the broad definition would be autonomy and freedom of choice. A lot of people will then say, oh, but, you know, there's a lot of people that have no other choices and this is where they've ended up. But you've still got to understand that that's still a choice to a degree in a lot of these senses where people are making choices that they might not make in other situations in their life. When it comes to trafficking, there is no choice. It's a forced, imprisoned kind of situation. In when it comes to, say, forced trafficking of migrant workers, passports are taken, rooms are locked at night. They're only sort of, you know, very rarely out in a community sense and without, you know, a minder. You know, they'd never have a minder nowhere near them. So it's it is a tricky, because we do talk about that broad definition of sex work, but trafficking is a forced labour situation where people are held prisoner and punished if they're not if they don't perform the tasks in which they've been set, I suppose. It is tricky, especially talking about the Epstein case, and I see a lot of these sort of quotes and memes and posts going around about how journalists should be referring to these victims and to the people that have been raped, essentially, because that's what it is when there is no consent being able to give, which is what happens when you're under the age of consent. You legally cannot give consent, and therefore it is rape. And so the suggestions going to journalists is things like, don't call it underage sex, call it rape, which I agree with. Don't call them, don't call them underage sex workers, because sex workers, again, have to be of age, and then so it's rape in that sense. And one thing that's a lot of sex workers, especially survival sex workers, are sort of speaking up about in that sense is that there are so many facets that go into young people under the age of 18 or under the age of consent that go into sex work, that's a whole different conversation in itself. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it quite well, because I think I've gone on sort of three different trains of thought, but yeah, the reasons that to answer your first question, then we can go and elaborate on the other stuff, is I believe that the main difference would be autonomy and choice of your body and what's being done to it and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, and yeah, the two main groups that you normally think of when you're talking about sex trafficking is, and I'm pretty sure it's for trafficking, it's like universally women, just about. If we're talking about, okay, the two groups I'm talking about, it's children and women who are taken usually from one country to another.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the one case, if you're anything approaching a decent human being, you recognize that a child can't give consent legally, so anyone who has sex with a child is by definition raping them. And yeah, these women who are trafficked, particularly across borders, and it does happen within countries as well, but it's seems to be mostly cross-border. They're held prisoner. They're not given a choice. They're either with actual violence or with threat of violence, forced to go through with it. So again, that's not consent. That's right.
And within, especially like if you look at the American situation, which we were sort of talking about earlier, with just in America in general, with the whole pimps idea, and that is a form of trafficking that is sort of almost sort of held up or allowed to happen because of the laws that then stop sex workers being able to find, proper help and protection from the law and proper, just rights in general to do the job that they're doing. And so then in that case, then they turn to pimps who offer that protection or that promise of, protection overall, and jobs and all that. And so, when you take away those laws and you replace it with decriminalisation and the rights of men and women in the industry to work their trade, the trafficking laws and the anti-trafficking laws that people often put onto these sort of situations, those laws are still around. Like trafficking has its own set of laws. And so there are situations where within the structure that we've got where we talk about sex work, there are sex workers who are essentially and effectively being trafficked within their own countries purely because their countries don't allow them to safely work in their own on their own violation and on their own terms.
Yeah,
I think I went on another tangent there. This is
that's okay.
Often that there are so many threads going through my brain. We'll get to them all.
Yeah, but this is where we're having a conversation on it, and and I think if we talk more about consensual sex work in its many varieties, and this is where it gets weird, particularly because this Epstein story is in America, and full service sex work is broadly illegal in America, and so you get people who moralizing, who are quite sure they're in the right, and these are not awful people, or at least a lot of them aren't awful people, but they equate all sex work with coercion and trafficking, and they really deny the voice of the sex workers themselves, which where we get the fun acronym SWERF.
Yeah, they're my favourite sort of, my favourite people. They're my favourite acronyms. Sort of, describe the anti-feminist feminists, really. The SWERFs are the sex worker exclusionary radical feminists, and the TERFs are the trans exclusionary radical feminists. They're basically feminists who deny certain women certain rights because they don't believe that either they are women when it comes to the trans TERFs, or they believe that all sex workers are, coerced and forced into it. And if we say that no, we're actually quite, happy in our work or anything, then we're victims of false consciousness, and we've been brainwashed into thinking it. And that, it's hard. One of my friends used to say to me all the time, sex workers can't have a bad day at the office. Like, and that to mean that, when you're a sex worker, everything has to be, to the public and to the world, just so we can exist. We have to be, oh, it's great, and I do it for the sex, and it's beautiful and glamorous, and I go to these great hotels, and everyone's fabulous. If you say, oh my God, it was such a horrible night, and I saw the most disgusting, smelly guy, and it was horrible, and then I got caught in the rain on the way to somewhere else, and I smelled like wet dog. Whatever you say that's bad, they're like, well, you chose this, and it's your, or where you could just leave the industry. It's so bad, and it's such an exploitative, situation that you're in. forgetting that almost every single job on the planet is exploitative, and that most people would leave it if there wasn't the promise of that paycheck every week. But for some reason, for sex work, if you don't enjoy it, then you must be, downtrodden and wanting to be rescued and needing this kind of, white knight fucking angels with cupcakes to come in and save you. And if you're not sort of the happy hooker all the time, they kind of come at you. And so it makes it really hard for people to sort of, when we have these conversations about trafficking versus sex work, if you've just mentioned that you've had a shit night, or you saw a crappy client, or, you hate your job, this gives voice and fuel to this swerve argument that all people who are in sex work are forced and hated and are denigrated, and forgetting that, like I said before, I don't know of a single full-time checkout chick that wouldn't leave that job immediately if she didn't need the money, or he, or it's a hard kind of, you've always got to have that mask of glamorous happy hooker face, because otherwise the rescuers swoop in.
Yeah, I've literally never heard an anti-sex work argument that can't be equally validly applied to a whole swath of other jobs. You just take the word sex out of the sentence, and the sentence is the same. It's like, some sex workers are exploited. Yeah, some workers are exploited. Some sex workers feel trapped and they don't have a choice. Oh, some workers feel trapped and they don't have a choice. Some sex workers are exploited and abused by their bosses. Some workers are exploited and abused by their bosses. It's not to brush it under the carpet.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's really frustrating because it takes away from the fact that we have real workplace issues that we would like addressed in certain ways, and things like our safety and the laws, and being able to, if something does go wrong, whether it's an assault or something physical, or a theft, or someone breaks into your car even, the sex workers find it very hard to report crimes against them, regardless of whether it's a sex crime or just a physical, another sort of crime, and not even that happens at work. Sex workers are afraid of police in most sort of situations, because just say in America, I mean, in Australia it's not as bad in most places, but in America, if you happen to be a sex worker and you go to the police for something completely unrelated, that someone broke into your car and stole your purse and blah, blah, and it turns out and find out that you're a sex worker, you can be arrested and, have your kids taken off you, and have your bank shut down all your accounts, and all these just ridiculously awful, stupid things happen because you went to the police for something, or and it can happen in medical situations, in hospitals, in the emergency departments and things in certain places, or mental health facility, you go in there to get help and they find out you're a sex worker, they sometimes will turn people away because, well, it's just your job, you don't actually have mental health issues. Like, it's really bullshit that sex workers have to put up with all of this crap just because of one small factor of their life is how they earn a living. And it's bullshit.
And even actually on the trafficking side of things, if someone is obsessively, I'm a champion of trafficked sex workers because it's horrible and exploitative, and they're not at least equally a champion of other trafficked workers, because all across, to a really extreme degree, I know, through Asia and the Middle East, and to a lesser extent in places like America and even Australia, there are domestic workers who are basically trafficked illegally, and they have their passport taken from them, and they're violently abused and threatened, and they're never paid, and they're never allowed to go anywhere, and they can't go to anyone.
Like people like, say, Ashton Kutcher, who does this whole, real men don't buy girls sort of, and it's become very sort of popular in this sort of anti-trafficking, anti-sex slavery thing, which I all sex workers want an end to trafficking, and they want an end to sexual slavery. Like, they really do, because I mean, that's not sex work. That's rape, and that's not what we are. So they all want that end, and so but then you have sort of so your Ashton Kutcher, fucking white knight rescuer of all these women. Sort of, I just think I bet he's sitting there typing out this shit on his iPhone that was made by some 7-year-old kid for 2 cents a day that's been trafficked and taken away from their family while he's wearing his fucking whatever Nike Calvin Klein bullshit that's also been made by a trafficked worker who is exploited in terrible ways in a sweatshop. And I just think, no. And then there's nothing about the fight for decriminalisation and the fight for human rights in those sort of ways. I just think, well, no, you're just a posturing fucking asshole that's making yourself look brilliant because the world has this weird hang up about sex. You don't care about trafficking, and you don't care about exploitation, and you don't care about the people that are being forced into labor unless that labor happens to be sex, and you can't tell the difference between the forced labor and the consensual labor because you've just put it into this one big umbrella. And that sort of thing, and it's like the Lena Dunhams and the people who sign off these kind of foster and sester kind of agree with these bills in America that have really created awful situations for sex workers, and especially the survival sex workers and the non almost every sex worker is an average sex worker. They're sort of they're just paying the rent, they're just doing the bills, they're just the glamorous $1,000 an hour in the penthouses. They're very rare, and yes, they exist and they're good on them doing their job, but most sex workers are just average Joes, and it goes down the line until you've got the survival sex workers who are the most needing of this, I guess, fight for their rights. And that fight is not to get rid of their jobs, it's their fight to create this decriminalised industry where they can work safely and get the help that they will need if they need it for any reason. And that's all of us. I mean, that's all workers need, that the safety of the protection of their workplace and the security of a bank account and the security of help when they need it in any situation, whether it's medical, mental, financial, whatever. And yet, we treat these people like idiots, and we treat them like they're exploited and need to be rescued, rather than just offering, giving the freedom of choice and proper laws and regulations around, or decriminalised their work. Yeah.
And I will admit to, in the past, I would have been in the camp of saying, no one wants to do sex work. They're all being exploited to some degree. That just makes sense, because I'm thinking, if I consider the idea, if I feel like I was being forced to have if I was being forced to have sex with someone in a situation I'd be, ew, awful. And that was, I'll freely admit, that was a position of ignorance. That was, I'm old enough, was at uni in the 80s and 90s with old school second wave feminists, and they were very strident about this. And I was like, yep, you make a good case, because I'd never talked to a sex worker. And then the magic of the internet.
Yeah, that is so often the case when you talk to somebody who has these very strong views about sex work in that sort of way, and you ask, oh, well, have you ever met a sex worker? And most of them haven't. They might have watched a documentary, they might have read a sob piece, they might have, read that kind of pity porn that the rescuers like to purvey. And there are some really sad, awful stories out there of things that happen to sex workers within, very rich Western countries such as, Australia and Canada and America and stuff. But you also find, that these most of the rescuers have very limited experience with actual sex workers, and deliberately so, because they've tried to speak to rescuers and cupcake girls and pink crosses and those sort of organizations to sort of say, look, I get what part of what you're trying to do is comes from a good place, but do you see how it's actually can be quite damaging and quite sort of offensive, and you know, you get blocked and you get yelled at and you get called, you told you're brainwashed and told that you're, you know, an agent of Satan and or whatever they want to throw at you, you know, that really, you know, hurts you right deep in the heart. But it's frustrating because it's like you're only listening to the bits you want to listen to. It's like Israel Folau with his bloody, you know, covered in tattoos and having his hair cut and quoting the next line that says, well, you can't be gay. But, you know, it's that sort of cherry picking of crap, and not listening to the whole kind of story of the sex work experience, because the sex work experience of a whole kind of goes against or is sort of fucks up everything that they're trying to say and do, because it doesn't actually match their point of view, and so they won't listen to it, and they block and delete and abuse. It's fun.
Yeah, I think it was probably through Twitter where I actually got to see firsthand voices of sex workers, and it soon became apparent. It's like, and I've seen a bunch of these people, and if I dared to say, "You don't have agency, you're weak," they'd snap me in half. It's like incredibly strong-willed, independent people who are definitely in control of their lives, and it's like, okay, maybe shouldn't try and speak for these people. Maybe speak with people who have a lived experience.
Yeah, you know, and it's getting better. It really is. You know, there are far more voices out there and far more, I guess, platforms willing to give those voices, let those voices be heard. There's still a long way to go, though, because those same platforms, there are by that same token, there are just as many loud voiced turfs and swerfs and bigots and fuckwits out there that have almost even bigger platforms and more mainstream platforms in which to spew their vitriol and misinformation. But, you know, we're getting there, and I think, you know, there's been some really big leaps and bounds in sex work activism and stuff, and especially with, you know, I mean, you know, one step forward, 100 steps back, and, you know, we have these great voices and great stuff, and then you get the Foster Sester bullshit in America, which was sort of to fight anti-trafficking, and all it did was, you know, possibly lead to the deaths and murders of quite a few sex workers, and the disappearance of sex workers, and the loss of sex worker income, and the loss of sex worker safe spaces, and the loss of sex worker advertising platforms. And, you know, the bullshit goes on of what that sort of has done and did, and all without sort of, you know, with this ridiculous where there were already laws around trafficking and around that sort of stuff that didn't need to come into the whole Backpage stuff, which is where it all focused its wrath at first, this sort of advertising platform that was a den of trafficking, which it just wasn't. It was just where sex workers advertised. And I don't think there was a single trafficker that was, you know, or single kind of sex trafficking ring that was busted because Backpage closed down. It just fucked up the job for a hell of a lot of people. Yeah, shit.
Yeah, I think I've seen multiple analysis of the statistics in America since those laws were passed, and even law enforcement is acknowledging trafficking's gotten worse. It's because both voluntary and coerced sex workers have become even less likely to go to the cops. So people who want to exploit, hurt, and murder sex workers feel like they have this extra level of impunity now because it's even less likely to go to the cops.
One of the interesting things, which is also one of the horrible things, is when it came into effect and Backpage and all the advertising platforms kind of disappeared, there was a huge influx of pimps sending messages and texts to independent and private sex workers saying, hey, now that you can't advertise, now that you've got no platform, now that you've got no blah, blah, I'll look after you. And so all it really did, it just pushed a whole bunch of sex workers out of work and a whole bunch more into dangerous situations, and did absolutely nothing to combat trafficking. And I mean, the problem with America, though, is because of these laws and because of the you know, I hate to say it, but the fucking fake news media, you know, you get these things like the whole Super Bowl thing where they go on every year that Super Bowl is this sort of mid kind of hub for trafficking and for, you know, young people to be taken in and taken out from other countries and from America to be trafficked in for just sex work and all. And it's just, it's kind of, you know, yes, there is quite a large influx of sex work that happens around that time, but it's sort of similar to the same influx of sex work that happens when Parliament is sitting in Canberra, you know, because there's a lot more people there and there's a lot more people with money and there's a lot more people there. There's not a trafficking thing. It's just the fact that whenever a big event happens in a city, the sex workers often benefit from the tourism and the influx of people from other places. But so yeah, and the Super Bowl gets it, and there's another one, I don't know, I think it might be, I don't know, what's the baseball one? World Series. Yeah, I think there was something about the World Series being a big sort of hub or magnet for trafficking, and it's just bullshit. It's just the media like to create sort of these buzzwords and fear and who do we hate today and who can we be angry at today that isn't the people we should actually be angry at, and it sort of always comes down to the sex workers and in those sort of in that sort of hatred week. Yeah.
Well, it's a very dramatic story, and the media like to, even if they're not actually lying, they like to exaggerate and they like to have a black and white narrative. Here's the goodie, here's the baddie. And with something like sex work, they feel quite comfortable in creating a narrative around this bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like drugs. It's similar to especially with say like weed, which is so harmless and so kind of nothing in the land of what we actually have that we can buy over the counter and consume ourselves for very, you know, for legally and cheaply. So there's this demonizing of it, and it's a tried and true bring people together to fight against the non-existent fear that sex work brings or that marijuana brings or, you know, that gay people bring. It's just this, it unites bigots and small-minded idiots, and that's sort of, you know, become the way of the world is uniting small-minded idiots into hating onto some sort of, you know, a minority or a thing that can be easily created as a monster. And sex workers have very little voice and have very little rights, and there are so many thousands of them that you wouldn't know if you know, it's that whole thing of someone you love is a sex worker, and if you don't know somebody in your life that is a sex worker, then that probably means that there's something unsafe about you, because there'll be somebody in your life that works in some way in the sex industry, and if you don't know it, it's because they don't trust you enough to tell you, and that's probably something you should think about in your you know, because everybody's worked in some aspect of it, you know, or knows somebody who has. But yeah, I lost my train of thought going on to my little soundbite there that we can surely use for something.
That's good. There's a conversation going on in the chat. I said I'd keep you abreast of this.
Oh, yeah.
And Leanne's asking the question about when there is a legalized or decriminalized environment, and in a lot of states in Australia, brothels are legal. They're regulated, but legal. I don't think it's universal yet, but in many Australian states they are. And the question is, how much better does that make it for the workers? Do they generally feel safer? Do they feel like they can speak out?
If you're asking for a legalised situation, then no. I mean, certain workers do in a legal situation feel a lot safer than others. So say, for example, the difference between Sydney and Melbourne. Melbourne has a legalised system, and New South Wales has a decriminalised system. So with decriminalisation, there's still the legal side of it. With legalising, though, there's not always decriminalisation. So say a brothel, a licensed worker. So if you in Victoria, you have to have a license to work, which is a big problem for a lot of people. They don't want to have a license. They don't feel like they need to have a license. It can be quite although you can sort of hide your name on the license register, you know, there's Freedom of Information Acts and things people can, you know, find out. There's and there's a lot of people that can't, you know, that don't want to get the license, or that can't for other reasons. Then there might be an immigrant and don't have the correct visas and all that stuff. So you've got to say a licensed sex worker with her sex SWE number. Something goes wrong in her life, whether it's a work situation goes wrong or something else, like we were talking about, you know, the car gets broken into or whatever, they're going to be far more likely and able to go to the police and feel more safe doing so, and not feel like their particular job will affect any of the outcomes of what might happen in that sort of sense, or in a medical sense, or going to see a mental health professional or all that sort of stuff. But then there are a lot of workers in Victoria who aren't licensed, and then they face those criminalised aspects of their work. So the people that work down in St Kilda, it's not legal to solicit on the streets, so that comes into an illegal situation, and they would not ever go, well, they would, but it's very rare that they would go and seek help, or feel comfortable in saying what they do for a living, or anything like that. Whereas in New South Wales, where it's a decriminalised situation, so the work is not criminalised. And so there are still, because people sort of say sometimes, oh, well, if it's decriminalised and it's a free-for-all, then what, you could just open a brothel anywhere and you wouldn't have any kind of health and safety things. And that's not the case. I mean, everybody there are situations and limits and laws within all industries. But say I'm a hairdresser and I want to work from home, then I can do that. There are certain things I might need to check off on a box, but I can work from home. I can travel around and work as a hairdresser in my car, in my caravan, and do haircuts at caravan parks. If I wanted to travel around Australia and do that, I could go and set up at a kiosk in the shops or at a marketplace or anything like that. Doesn't matter. My work is decriminalised. I'm not a criminal for wanting to cut hair. And that's sort of, if you put that onto sex work, that's basically what it is. So, if I was in a decriminalised state and I had a sex work room at my house, and somebody came in and fell down the stairs because I hadn't, set up a barrier properly or whatever, then they could sue me for, having an unsafe workplace or whatever. And that would come under all those normal laws and regulations that businesses do. But my job would not be part of what is illegal there or what I've done wrong there. So I don't know if I'm explaining it sort of well. Basically, there would also need to be, if we suddenly decriminalise sex work today across the board, which would be wonderful, there would have to be a hell of a lot of retraining going on in legal situations, in medical situations, in mental health situations, and all that sort of stuff to kind of come up to date with the fact that it's just somebody doing a fucking job and it's not a criminal activity or a mental health issue or whatever. So yeah, I think, did I answer the question?
I think so. I mean, the terms the terms decriminalisation and legalisation confuse the hell out of a lot of people. They don't know the difference. If I understand it right, legalisation means there's a legal framework to perform the work, but it's heavily regulated and quite constrained. And the simple act of performing sex work can be a criminal act in itself if you're outside of those legal boundaries. Whereas a decriminalised environment, doing sex work, you can face criminal charges just for doing sex work. But if you have a business set up, you're subject to the same constraints as basically any businesses. Like, a checkout isn't policed the way a legal brothel worker in Melbourne is. But yeah, if you're running a retail operation, as you say, Sydney, it's decriminalised. If you're running a retail operation and you're doing something dodgy or unsafe in the terms of running your business, you'll face prosecution. But just running your business doesn't get you.
But part of that is not, well, and he's a pharmacist, so that's going to add to the, to the punishment. If he's selling meth out of the back of his pharmacy, then yeah, that's the crime. But him being a pharmacist is not a crime. And then, you know, and you've got people also that come at sex workers and try and push the Nordic model or the Swedish model, which is it's such a confusing way they try and sell it as well. It's basically, no, sex work is fine. We're just going to criminalise your client. You can sell sex, but you can't buy sex. And it's like, well, hang on, that makes no sense to me. Like, it was like, I remember years ago when I was in high school, smoking was legal at 16, but you couldn't buy them until you were 18. And that never sat right in my head. I was like, well, how does that work? So I can legally smoke at 16, but I can't. And it's that sort of idea of, you know, and in the Nordic model, one of the biggest issues is that the police that are supposed to be the protectors also sort of become the prosecutors and become the hunters, and that's no, you know, to me, government and police and all that sort of stuff, there should be as minimal interference in our lives. You know, make sure my school, you know, for the government, I think make sure my schools run and my roads are safe and my infrastructure works well. I've got to stay the hell out of my bedroom and keep out of my job and keep out of my, you know, personal habits of things that I want to do. And I think the police should be there to, you know, solve crimes, not, you know, arrest people for just making a choice of how they want to earn a living. And that's how it comes under when it comes to the Nordic model, where you've got sex workers being told, yeah, sure, you can do your job, but in everything that is around that is criminalized. So the clients is criminalized. The being what's the term? It's like if you benefit from sex work, then you are then criminalized. So, for example, you know, you're a sex worker and you're married and you help pay the bills. Your husband is benefiting from prostitution. Your husband can go to jail. Your kids can be taken off you. Your landlord can kick you out because if he's receiving the money for the rent that you've made from sex work, then he is, you know, it's insane. And yet people try and sell this as some kind of great, you know, savior for sex workers, when it's probably, you know, it's almost worse than you know, being illegal. You know, it's just it's insane how people kind of try and infantilize, if that's the word, I can never say it properly, sex workers into sort of, you know, oh, they're there, we'll help you and we'll show you how you do your job and we'll hold your hand through it and we'll make sure. You know, it's just like, fuck, just let us get on with it for the most part, you know, and let us pay our rent and feed our kids and, you know, the shit that everybody has to do that has a job.
And another variation of the weird double standard laws that I've heard, and I think this is accurate, I don't think it was just a joke, but of course, at least I'm not sure if it's across the board, but at least in some areas of the US, it's legal to make porn. I think it's actually across the board legal, but maybe there's different restrictions in different places. But it's legal to make porn, to pay people to have sex on camera. And so I've seen this done as a joke. It's like cops kick down the door. There's this couple having sex and going, "You're under arrest. You're having sex for money. That's the crime." And then they point, "No, there's a camera. We're making porn." And the cop goes, "As you were then," and lets them go because making porn's legal. So just adding a camera makes the situation legal.
I mean, you know, there are so many different reasons that people have sex, and just so many of those times, you know, it's a transaction of sorts. Of, you know, of it, the minute money comes into it, people get so weirded out and disgusted. And you know, we live in this money-driven capitalist society that creates this need for us to make money. And, you know, women's bodies are exploited constantly. You know, it's like, oh, women should, you know, like this argument that the feminists, that the swerves often have, is that, you know, women should be able to live their lives and use their bodies exactly, and women's bodies are their own and their temples and they can do whatever they want. And sex workers are like, oh, okay, well, I'm a sex worker. Well, no, not like that. Only that we say that you can, you know. And it just blows my mind that that these voices are still so loud, and have still saying the same bullshit. But yeah, like I said earlier, we're starting to get louder on the sex worker voices and the activist voices and the minority voices in all senses, whether it's, you know, sex work or other minorities, and marginalized. I don't want to say minorities, marginalized, I think is the word.
Marginalized people.
Marginalized groups. And misunderstood as well. I think that's, you know, something that really irks me, is the constant education I have to give to anybody who doesn't quite understand the massive umbrella that sex work and the sex industry has, but also, you know, I just get sick of people asking me, oh, but why? Oh, but sure, you know, oh, but you're such a nice girl. Yeah, I'm really nice, and I'm even better when you give me the cash. No, it's just, you're just in it for the money. Well, yeah, mate, it's my job.
It's the only reason I get out of bed in the morning.
Like, if you tell me anybody who does their job would do their job for free,
Yeah.
and I will show you a liar.
Talking about the voices and the anti-sex work voices, and in any argument, a bad faith argument really pisses me off. And people who evade when you ask them a simple, direct question, and they evade and flip back to their talking points. I'm going to go on to someone that you're probably more aggro at than I am, but I fucking flip my shit whenever I see her on TV. Melinda Tankard-Rees.
Oh, can we not say that? Bad taste in my mouth. Oh, yes. Yeah, go on.
Last time I was unfortunate enough to see her, because like she makes me so angry, I'll switch off.
Yes,
but
I cannot watch her. Oh.
She was on The Drum on ABC, and it was an audience panel talk, and good old Tom's there talking to people. And
my lovely friend Lucy was on as well.
Who was on?
Lucy, my friend Lucy. Yes, see, that's the last time I ever watched her as well. I think I am never, ever, ever giving this woman any kind of air ever again. I saw that.
Yeah, the people I recognise.
Episode that was.
There was Lucy. There was Brendan McLean, who's a musician, not a sex worker, although he did do the fabulous gay semiotics video for one of his tracks. It was inspired by that 70s gay semiotics thing with the hanky in your pocket, and then he acted them all out in the video, including getting his head pooped on at the end of the video. And that stayed up on YouTube for a good week or two before it was taken down, which is a bit of an achievement, quite honestly. But yeah, they were in there. And I remember one particular point where she's saying, got to stop all porn, got to stop it. It's all terrible. It's all exploitative. And I think it was Lucy who calmly said, you need to accept that that isn't realistic. Erotica and porn have always and will always exist. It is absolutely unrealistic to say, stamp it out. That cannot happen. History shows us that can't happen. So would you support people in building an ethical framework? Because I work with people who work in an ethical framework. And that was a really simple question, and she refused to answer it at all. And just flipped straight back to her talking points of, it's all exploitation. You've got to stand back.
And that is you find in almost every debate with a swerve against sex work or pornography. Gail Dines or Deans is very similar as well. They just will not answer the question because they can't. There is no answer to that. I mean, you know, I've written quite a few pieces on the whole porn harms kids rhetoric about, you know, we should get rid of porn because kids are watching it and it's fucking them up. And my first thing with all of that is porn is not made for kids. So stop using children to, you know, to try and sort of, you know, create your argument against this. You know, alcohol is really bad for kids. Cigarettes are bad for everyone, but, you know, there are a lot of fucking things out there that are really bad for kids that we don't run around banning because kids are possibly getting access to it. We work a way, we try and find a way to create, safety messages and barriers and boundaries and all that sort of stuff. And so that's my first argument against the porn harms kids. And the second thing is if they are accessing it, yes. They're seeing stuff that turns my hair a lighter shade of blue, They are seeing, and I talk to young people a lot about what they're seeing, and it's pretty full on. And the ones that aren't fucked up about it are the ones that understand that that's full on and they have had chats with their parents or have had a decent kind of sex education within their sort of home life or school life that has let them know that if you come across stuff like that, it's not for kids, it's a bit full on, it's not realistic, it's not what is expected of you. And the kids that have proper education and proper understanding of these things usually don't actually even seek out a lot of that full on stuff. They'll still be seeking out porn and they'll still be, checking out boobs and vag and dicks and all the stuff that they want to see because that's what kids and teenagers do because they're curious. It's what adults do. It's what we all do. But this sort of idea that of banning it to me is this sort of we're shutting the gate way after the horse has bolted. The porn is there. The culture is there. The porn stars are there and enjoy their work and want to do it. And hello, background person.
Yes. This is what happens when I record in the kitchen. Occasionally someone says, but they've become very good at making sure their face doesn't appear on camera. They're very good at it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But also, what are you saying? The people who were in the ban porn camp, besides the unrealistic nature of that, they're also 9 times out of 10, if you say, hey, let's have a frank and open discussion with teenagers about porn, they lose their shit.
They lose their shit. And I know that from the SBS special that I did a couple of months ago on the feed, all about teaching kids about pornography and the prevailing kind of, epidemic we have of kids having an internet thing in their pocket that they can see everything on and more. And so we need to have this conversation. And I, after that show was on and following the comments and seeing the messages and the things that I got and the articles and sort of things, blog posts that were written about it, there really is this sort of fear that I don't even know what the fear really is, because the fact is that even this Christian website that wrote this whole big sort of piece about how awful I was about wanting to show young people pornography, which was never something I said anyway. I never said I wanted to show it. I just said I wanted to teach about it and educate that this stuff sort of exists. But yeah, they're hysterical about, oh my God, porn, these kids are seeing porn. I'm like, yeah, they are. Like, oh, the kids are seeing porn. And now this person wants to teach them about what they're seeing because the kids are seeing porn. I'm like, yeah, well, what do you want to happen? And I actually, on this Twitter conversation with him, I said, what do you think would be the right thing? You're telling me that me sitting down with a group of teenagers and saying, hey, there's going to be some shit you might see that could be quite confronting and this is what it's all about. Okay, fine. You don't want me to do that. What would you suggest? And then he went on about fucking God and moral centers and all that. And I'm like, no, that's not answering the question though, because you've already acknowledged that young people are viewing this. So now what do we do? What do we do now?
Yes.
You can't go back in time and not let them not see it. They've seen it. What do you want to do? Fucking no. God. Oh, with your God. If he doesn't have a solution, it means nothing to me.
Yeah, some people are very good at the denial side of things. The idea that you can put the toothpaste back in the tube after you've squeezed it out, and
you can. You go to the air pocket and you go kind of squish, like little bits.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's actually sounding like sort of specialty porn at that point.
Anyway, yes, no, I know what you mean. You can't put the egg back in the eggshell. You just can't. Yeah. It's there. So let's look at the egg and figure out what to do with it, Let's Humpty Dumpty this shit, man.
Yeah, it's the whole repression thing. It was like going back to what we were originally saying. Like, if someone champions themselves as a warrior against trafficking and exploitation, and all they ever talk about is sex workers, go, I don't think exploitation is your problem. I think
Yeah,
you've got a weird fucking problem with
you've got a
sex.
problem with sex, and you've also got a bit of a boner for being, seen as this white knight against sex. And I think that's a lot of it as well. It's this kind of, I'm the hero and I'm going to save the London ladies and all the damsels in distress. And it's so offensive to me, because there are so many people in this world that are exploited and trafficked and slaved and treated horribly for their labour, that have nothing to do with sex. And until we recognise that, I think really these rescuers, they'll, until I will not have a place for those people in my sort of, you're doing good work meter, until they also start storming, sweatshops and tech factories and that sort of stuff. And most of them, when it comes to rescuing these women in these situations in other countries like Cambodia, especially, there's big rescuer kind of missions that go over to Cambodia to rescue the poor sex workers, and they sort of take them out of these situations where they're actually earning kind of money and feeding their families, and and there might not be the best situations in the world, but it's a living and it's a life, and it's something that they're doing, and then they're pulled out and they're sort of taught how to weave baskets to sell to tourists for far less money than they probably would have made doing, and working for these sort of rescue organizations now in a second kind of slave labor, kind of making beads for precious white women who want to feel good about themselves. And it's horrible. It makes me so angry that I had a friend a while ago who's not a great friend anymore, but who went over and did one of these rescue missions. And while I was working quite heavily full time as a sex worker as well, and I remember saying to her, "What are you doing? Have you not listened to me? Have you not has nothing that I've ever said about this shit got through?" Like, it was really, I was quite offended by it. And she was out there asking people for money and save the girls, and it really was offensive.
I've read some terrible stories about the rescue organizations, and it's largely across Asia, like everywhere from South Asia, like India and Sri Lanka, all the way through East Asia, Southeast Asia, where in some cases, because they found it exactly as you said, like, these women were not in a great situation, but were actually getting money and getting money to their family. So when they were quote unquote rescued, and then given no support, or said, hey, go work at the Nike factory for 5 cents an hour, they were like, wait, this is worse. It's not worse because you're not having sex.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, the fixation on the sex, it's like you're actually putting them in a worse situation. And there were cases where it's like their rescue centres, the women were held against their will in these rescue centres, and they said,
for your own good, though. It's for your own good,
because they were going back to the brothels. They're going, well, something's clearly wrong, so we have to hold them against their will. So
what's wrong? Get out, white women, and fucking with your bullshit colonialism, get the fuck out. And let these women go back to work and, put food on the tables. For God's sake, get over yourselves. Like, fuck, you want to rescue that bad, go to RSPCA, get a fucking cat or a dog, set up a little sanctuary, go and rescue all the little kitties. They need it.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, we're coming up on the hour. And there is actually one good question that I'd like to round off on. Leanne, who's been very active in the chat, she said she has a problem with the sex industry generally being controlled, dictated by men, which I think is possibly broadly true. But if someone wants to be a bit more ethical, I think you know a couple people you could point them to.
Well, in that situation, I mean, are they talking about pornography or sex work? I mean, sex work, find a private individual sex worker, and then that she's or he is, getting all the funds and all the and everything. They're not sort of passing anything on to an agency fee or to a brothel fee or something like that. Read sex workers' ads and respond accordingly. If they say text only, then text them. If they say call only, then call them. If they've got specific times that they're available, don't try and contact them out of their time, and don't try and haggle their fucking prices. Find someone within your budget. When it comes to porn, ethical porn that's brilliant and feminist, you could go looking at individual pornographers like, say, Lucy B, or there's Mickey Mischief is a really great BBW porn star. Oh gosh, off the top of my head, I'm all on the thing. But then certain companies, like, so you've got Bright Desire is a fantastic feminist pornography company. Permission for Pleasure, which my beautiful friend Morgana owns and runs. Light Southern is another Australian ethical feminist porn company run by a woman. They're out there, and if you just Google ethical pornography and feminist pornography, people often think, feminist porn is all just going to be like girls playing with hairy bushes and not shaving their armpits. And yeah, sure, there is that, but there's also, the right wide range of porn that, everything. My main things I would say is always pay for your porn. Because that helps create a far more ethical industry, and the money always goes to the performers and to the producers and to the people who are creating this content rather than the web hosts or whatever. So always, pay for your porn and treat your sex worker with respect. Pay them their fee. Tip them well, because this is their income, and be respectful of everybody's boundaries and everybody's what they say on their ads.
Yeah, and if you really want, you went a slightly different way to what I thought you were going to say when you said, wouldn't feminist porn just be? I thought wouldn't feminist porn just be stomping guys' balls or something? And that's out there.
Is that true? That's my favourite line.
If you really want a refreshing thing, just find out about an independent female dominatrix who specialises in just putting men through the ringer. That's probably
the main thing is, do your research when you're looking for stuff. Don't just go onto Pornhub and type in big boobed babes or whatever, because a lot of the stuff on Pornhub is either stolen content or it's not. The people who have created it are not making any money out of that. So I would always search for if you have a porn star that you really like, then search for that particular porn star's own website and own productions. So many of the people out there now have their own companies, their own webcam stuff, their own Snapchats, their own everything. And I think that's a really ethical way to begin, without having to sort of do anything more than you would normally do on your wanking schedule, and just just pay a bit more and pay a bit more attention to where your money and stuff is going when it comes to porn. And with sex workers, read the ads and respond accordingly.
I think that's an excellent way to round out this little chat. In summary, respect your sex workers and pay for your porn.
Yes, I was going to go like that, and that's not. I was supposed to be doing that. I'm all twisted. This camera is doing my head in. Yes, respect your sex worker, pay for your porn.
All right. Well, I hope people have gotten something out of this talk. I certainly had a lot of fun doing the talk.
Wasn't fun with you, Andrew.
Yeah, we'll be doing it again. See if we have time on the weekend.
Yeah. Set up. It should be fine.
But yes, and once this is out in podcast land, I've been doing talks with various guests. But Eva's definitely going to be regular. And we hope that you tune in again soon, but we'll say bye for now.
Bye for now.
Okay, that was our official podcast sign off. And to all the people who've been chatting away in the chat, you've been very, very well behaved. Thank you all for dropping in.
Cool comments?
Just generally, people were having little conversations. Like I said, when I brought a couple of them up, but everyone's been very positive. I haven't kicked anyone out of the chat. No one's been a jerk. So thank you everyone who's been watching us live. We will be back. I'll be back, and Eva will be back. And
We will. We'll see you soon.
Seeing so much of me this week with so many live things and pre-recorded things. But Eva will probably be back on the weekend, so I hope you tune in for that. But we'll say goodbye to all you live people now.
Hey, everybody.